going on? What's...
Nothing in particular. I mean, I'm leaving Sprout, so there's that. But otherwise, automation stuff. So.
And how's that been? What's been some of the challenges that you've come across doing that?
Contributing to 3 repos almost in parallel, and then learning how to run like your local or run your box with like your own Racine copy on it and stuff like that. So it's been interesting, but my hope is that everything will have some kind of selector on it, at least at a primitive level, which should hopefully make it easier for the rest of the team to like build around it if need be.
Now, how does that actually work? Like, is it? Because I think I've seen some of it in like the automation, but like, is that where we're like now turning specific types into where it's like a type of a string, but then you're returning a new string, or is that something else?
In Selenium or in Core?
In the automation.
So like the most of the changes were just around kind of like standardizing them, because there were like places where we would have like checkbox name instead of and a long time ago we had decided to just drop name because it was redundant, like in terms of brevity of the selectors, because the longer those are, the longer the HTML gets, right? Especially when the values in them could be really long, since we now have that like data QA text one, which could be all kinds of stuff. So it was like aligning that, and then also state, like data QA state just seemed not enough at times. So those were getting changed to like is checked or is disabled.
Right.
So it was kind of taking those and putting them in Racine so that they hopefully bubble their way up. The names won't, because Racine really has no concept of the titles in most cases, or name or whatnot. So, but the state one should be pretty self-aware. And then pretty much, just wherever it's wrapped in Core, you just kind of pass it down. But even if there is no name, the attribute should still be there. It'll just say data QA button with no name. So my hope is that it will be like a kicker to like yourself or a dev that goes, oh hey, this doesn't have a name. All you have to do is just literally pass down data QA button equals the name, and it'll overwrite the one lower down.
Right.
And then we can build components around those. The other piece of that was that I made a selector like wrapper kind of class that handles all of that silly bracket plus equals kind of bull crap that we have to manually do, and kind of makes that the way we do it. So now pretty much all you have to do is send a string to it that is the selector, which in most times is already going to be housed in the component that relates to it. So that could either be public and you can just borrow it, like if you need to get like a whole set of buttons or something like that.
Right.
Or you could just like write an accessor method or something like that. And then you could also send it the value. And then when you do like selector.getBy, it gets you the by that you need in the format that you need it already. So if it doesn't have a value, it's literally just brackets around the attribute. Otherwise it's brackets, attribute equals the value. Kind of cleans up some things, and then also you don't have all those formatter strings just kind of all over the place.
Yeah, we definitely have those like
Everywhere. So that's kind of why, like, as I've touched in the last couple weeks, like as I've touched components, I've tried to like update that, or it's not too bad. But yeah, that's kind of what I've been doing.
So, I mean, we use or we have Selenium automation. Like, what are your feelings on like how, like, if you could set up your ideal automated environment, like how would you have Selenium talk to the browser, and like the way that we select particular things, like how would you set that up for your ideal environment?
That's a very philosophical question, it feels like.
Could be.
Yeah, I don't know how I would design WebDriver. I don't know the inner workings of it, but if it was like Selenium, I would definitely simplify the API a little bit more. It feels like, even though there's a lot of literature around programming, like clean code or effective Java, that tells you you don't need super long method names.
Mm-hmm.
And if you do, your method's probably doing more things than it should.
Right.
Like, there are some of those things in Selenium, it feels like sometimes. And then, what we've done in our framework is, I think, is take a step in that direction, like that I would like it, is like to wrap it effectively and just make it easier to work with.
Right.
Which, I mean, is like, it's like what other Selenium flavors have done, like Waiter and stuff like that. It's literally just a simple wrapper, or it builds in your weights for you and stuff, which is what our base component class does for us.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, like, I would say our framework is at a pretty good level. It's just that it's old, and a lot of things aren't up to like the standards that we've kind of come up with as we've gone, and it's really hard to go back and fix things. But I don't know, my rule of thumb is, if you touch a class, if you see something, fix it, even if it's a small thing.
Yeah.
And then hopefully over time it becomes better. But yeah, maybe not necessarily in my ideal world. Like, I know Java so well now, but I wouldn't want to. Like, I would almost rather have us go with the JavaScript flavor, because then you can get much more buy-in. So basically choosing a language that's easy enough for more than just your team.
Right. Yeah, that would definitely be useful to get more buy-in from. I'm just gonna put this up.
From the team at large.
Yeah, because I mean, especially if you want to go with the direction of like not having just one group of people own something, the less barrier to entry, the better. So, I mean, especially for like when I was starting off with the automation, it was, I mean, I wouldn't say it was hard to get into, because a lot of the stuff was just written very plainly, which made it much easier for somebody who's less familiar with programming to get into it.
Sure.
But yeah, like finding all those ways to like make it as simple as possible so that more people can contribute is definitely ideal.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think there's simplicity, like, is definitely a key thing, but like when you get too simple, it increases the maintainability of it. So it's like finding that balance of simplicity versus best practice. And that's what that effective Java book was really. I mean, it was like 20% of the book was applicable to Selenium world. The rest was like what like our backend developers probably have to deal with and whatnot. But the things that were in there were very useful, and still things that could be useful. Like you guys use base component directly a lot, instead of like for when there's maybe not a component that exists or one that we're aware of. It's kind of a pain in the butt when you have like 8 different constructors, because they're all the same name, right? And it's really hard So like I think the first rule in effective Java is prefer static factories over constructors. So then you can just go like base component with by and the by, right? So it's very easy to discern exactly how do you want to use it and what you will get out of it.
Yeah, because like right now we have like 4, 5, 6 maybe different ways to create a base component.
There's like bys, there's web elements,
there's combinations
strings,
of by with whether or not you want it to be visible or not.
And I added ones that take the selector class too, which makes that easier, because then you're not sending like selector dot get by down every time. You can just send the selector. I think I had even built one too that was like, because it was getting weird when in a component class you wanted to make one with a name. So you have that string, right? Well, the selector that's on the class doesn't have a name. You can't give it one, right? Because it's for all. So you have to do like new selector, the selector dot get its attribute, comma, the name, and all this weird shit. I was like, why not just make a base component constructor that takes a selector, a value, and knows what to do with it, and whether or not it's visible. Much cleaner, then I don't have all these news all over the place. That's always fun too, is because the base component method get attribute, because you go get attribute selector dot get attribute, and you're like, what? Because that first method is you're not getting the attribute, you're getting the value of the attribute.
Right.
Anyways, but yeah, simple but good with best practices is definitely especially for a team where a lot of early programmers are a part of it, because like with Java right now, it's not like I can go like, hey, Pete, you want to contribute? Well, I don't use the front end that much. This tool is all about the front end, So yeah, so I feel like Selenium, JavaScript, or even Cypress for that matter, or another one is Gauge and Tycho, would be very useful to get a lot more people on board. Because like it's interesting the way you put it, like it's all of that is concentrated in one group, but then if you really think about it, it's really one person each time. Right, because all of the almost all the analytics ones go through me or Amy, right? So like it's even further splintered, and then even then, most of us aren't really touching the core of it.
All right.
So, which we shouldn't have to at certain points, but it's interesting. It's a great framework. I've loved working in it, but yeah, there are definitely things we should do to bring it to the broader audience.
How do you think there is value in creating a more accessible automation so that you don't need programming or extensive programming knowledge, or do you feel like it's in the user's best interest to learn, if they're going to get into it, to learn the maybe not all the best practices, but like at least enough for that in their future they would be able to dive deeper into it?
So yeah, that is, you kind of hit my viewpoint on that on the button, is like, if someone who I was mentoring or working with were to leave the company and go somewhere else, I would want them to feel empowered that they could be a junior Java developer if they really wanted to. I don't see a reason for like the whole QA and development skill sets to be completely separate. I feel that, especially with how I do my testing, I believe there's a cyclical relationship between automation and manual testing, My manual testing informs how I automate, and then my automate then, if those fail, right, that informs how I further manually test or explore down the line. It's definitely a tool, but just having that skill of programming helps you do a lot more than just automate tests, right? It can automate other things, skills as you've done, with your Python scripts and whatnot. It also helps you think differently about things. And I think that thought pattern goes a little bit hand in hand with the QA thought pattern. Instead of the programming paradigm is splitting up the problem into smaller problems that you can solve, right? And then in QA is kind of just breaking down things into smaller chunks for how to test it, but while maintaining the broader scope of the project, how it relates to other things.
Right.
I think those two can go very well together and inform your testing. I remember having a conversation with a developer a long time ago that wanted my testing to be very black boxed. Like, I don't want you to know what the code is and stuff. But I was like, that's silly. I was like, I feel like I could think of more situations or scenarios if I knew a little bit more about what's going on. And I've definitely found bugs in PR reviews.
Yeah.
That if statement doesn't quite make sense, in what it's doing. Like, I might not, from a professional sense, know JavaScript that well, but I could read it and figure things out. And then I definitely wouldn't be reading it first, though. I would definitely explore, and test and figure out things first, and then go, okay, what am I missing? So, yeah.
Where do you think that idea comes from for that? I guess there's a few different similar ideas. There's the you shouldn't test your own code. You shouldn't, like your example, you shouldn't know the inner workings of it to test it. Or maybe not you shouldn't know them, but you don't need to know them to test it. And then there was another one, but now I can't remember what it was.
Well, first, I don't agree with the first point. I don't think you shouldn't be the person to test your own code. I think you shouldn't be the only person to test your own code. You should be making sure that it at least works in some sense before you give it to someone that might be that a developer, another developer that's looking at it and running with a QA script, or QA is looking at it, or anybody for that matter. What was the second part?
The second one was your example of a developer telling you that you should be testing via black box or with no insight into the code.
I mean, over my 35 years of being human, I think I understand what being a human is about, and humans are not perfect. And I know that I'm not going to remember every single scenario about something. Just looking at the code could even just jog my memory about something on the other side of the app.
Sure.
Right? And we obviously, we develop these tools, right? Our automation to do that. We write down things like I have the reporting testing checklist,
right.
And it's a summary of almost all of the general features of it. Like, every report should be able to generate a PDF or a CSV and schedule delivery. Those I feel like that's where I feel like the developer should be responsible for a lot of the happy path testing that they're knowing based on the requirements.
Right.
Whereas we look at the integration between the features and then the overall picture. If I change this report, is it going to break something in inbox or something like that, right? Those are the things that we should be thinking about. And that's why I did the checklist, right? I was like, you can use this to inform your own testing of it so that when I get it, it's not just broken right off the bat. And that's kind of how our team evolved. It wasn't just me thinking that too. I'm pretty sure Brian our PM was kind of kind of sick of that over the wall mentality, like just getting something that just doesn't work during BV.
Right.
And it's not a knock on developers or nothing. They're just, they're using what information they have to do their own testing without even realize they're doing testing half the time. And I hate saying they, because we're all engineers, right?
Well, the they as in the person working on it.
The collective, yeah. And that's what I think part of our job too, is just to help them make better, like, informed decisions when testing. So, if that makes sense.
No, it does. Yeah, no, I mean, I was just curious what your thoughts were on, like, where you think that those ideas come from, and, like, what would be that instance where, you know, that's, I would think, is a learned behavior of, you know, somebody at some point being told that, like, this person doesn't need that, just give that to them and they can just work with it.
Yeah, I'm sure you could get pulled down a rabbit hole, like looking at the code and stuff like that. I mean, as it happens. That's what happened with a lot of my, like, racing stuff and fixing Selenium things, because then it's broken and it's like, well, what does it really make sense to go line by line and fix this, or just rewrite it really quick because I'm really quick at making components now, and then when at the end it's like, oh wow, this is much better now than it was before. But that, I mean, it's so easy to go down a rabbit hole doing anything, and that's why I say, like, after I've done kind of my own exploratory pass through it, then maybe I'll go look at a PR or something like that, especially if it's a PR that I understand the system behind it. But, like, I think just being familiar with, you know, basic computer science and kind of being able to parse, like, the JavaScript has made me a better tester, like understanding the technology behind things, because then you can begin to see the seams, you know, and identify places where, you know, again, at Sprout, QA has traditionally done front-end testing. We aren't, you know, our development team are adding unit tests and stuff, but maybe not everything is covered, you know. But we wouldn't know that if I didn't understand, you know, in my analytics pipeline that we're using Hadoop, we're using Spark Jobs, we're using Elasticsearch, right? I may not understand the technology deeply or how to implement it myself, but I can see points where maybe I can just suggest, hey, what are we doing in between here? And then they're going, oh, we're actually doing nothing. That's probably not a good thing. And again, not being able to read the code or go in and actually do a code review isn't necessarily going to boost that per se, but just being interested in the technical, I think, helps.
Yeah, I mean,
it's an outside the box kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, I'm definitely one for knowing more is better than knowing less. Because, I mean, just being exposed to a particular area for a long period of time, you start to find those patterns and notice the areas that frequently suffer, or you find the issues and are more aware of the spots where you need to have a keener eye on during that developmental phase.
Do you feel like there's, like, a limit to that, and then kind of it starts declining after? Like, you get that kind of, you know, like after you've been driving on the road for a long time, right, you get that nod off kind of feeling, kind of like that, where you just, the blinder effect.
Yeah, I typically go with well, now I can't remember it. Foggy or hazy, or like your
fog of war.
well, maybe not that, but yeah, I mean, there's always instances where at some point you reach that threshold where you, if you don't start to act to counteract that effect, then you do start to look over those problems, or any instance where you either are told or you find a way to like work around a problem, then that problem becomes less apparent because you start to learn the workaround, and then that's what you end up using, and then you forget that the workaround you've been using is actually something that is broken, that you're just haven't thought about in a while,
and you didn't write the bug, and then you forget it existed.
That's definitely something that can and has happened. Is like if you're not on top of it and write up that issue first, like that is a potential for a feature going out broken, or at the end of your project you realize that like, oh yeah, we can't actually ship because this whole section just doesn't work, because going from here to here doesn't work, and we've been going around it the entire time. Yeah, it's not good. It's also not a good feeling when you realize that you've done that. That's like
even if it's little things.
Oh yeah.
Or even if there's the opposite of that too, that you do write it up and then it just never gets fixed.
Yeah. That's definitely something that would be interesting to explore. Would be all those instances where you have written up, like, I mean, with projects that we've been on, like, you may have a backlog of like 100+ issues that are just not priority, so they probably won't get fixed.
I believe the usual rule of thumb is to eventually delete those.
Yeah, I mean, and that's very similar to the glassy-eyed look at your project. Is you may have an issue written up, but if it's been not prioritized, then you're just going to say like, oh well, we already have it written up, so we don't need to worry about it. But that can also cause problems where it's written up, you're not worried about it, so it's just never brought up again.
And then 5 months later, somebody sees it, and then you're like, I feel like I wrote that up.
Yeah. No, I've definitely had that happen.
Oh, I know I have.
Yeah, there have been more than once where an issue I wrote up ended up just sitting around until a customer said, hey, this is broken or doesn't look right. It's like, oh yeah, we have that bug.
It's all right.
It's like, well, I guess now we can work on it because now it's a priority. But yeah, like, what are your feelings on those types of issues where you have a defect that has been written up that has just been pushed off? Like,
I mean, it really depends. It depends on what the issue is and whether or not I truly believe that it can have a high customer impact or a high risk ratio kind of to it. If it does, then it's interesting because you found it, right? But then it's not thought of as important, and it's almost like you feel like you didn't push hard enough, so it's still your fault, even though you found it.
Right.
and that's why that's another reason why metrics of how many bugs found is always just struck me as silly, right? Like, it doesn't necessarily mean I'm doing my job good. That just means that somebody else is possibly not doing their job well, or it's just some weird stuff, you know. But yeah, if high customer impact is, and it doesn't get prioritized, I tend to take that personally. So
yeah, I've
because it's hard to remember half the bugs that are in there.
Yeah.
So when somebody asks you, "Oh, did we test for this?" I think so, right? Oh yeah, there's a bug. I wrote it up. You know, I'm not gonna remember that. Way too many. But yeah.
Yeah, there. I've definitely had a problem sometimes where I sometimes am, I don't know what that would be. I care about all the bugs I write up, and so I find all of them as important because especially if like I have a sense of like I want the thing that I'm representing to be of a certain quality to it, that like if I see like little issues like that, to me hits me hard as like it's not what I think our quality is. So all of these are important, even if they are just minor, you know, alignment issues or like whatever it may be.
Yeah, like the one you found the other day, text file,
yeah, that
which nobody responded on, I think.
No, they did.
Did they?
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, there was I think an issue written up today for it.
Yeah, I think I would agree with you on that. Yeah, I do think that everything I write up is important. It's when you take the context of the impact that it has, the more impact that it has, the more I blame myself when it's not fixed and somebody finds it.
Yeah. Yeah, especially because I mean, there's a few different like elements that, I don't know. There's probably some sort of psychological thing revolving around that idea. Like, I mean, one could be that that's. I mean, I'm probably speaking too generally, but like that's like one thing somebody in a QA position, like that's the one of a few things that is like a visible thing that you create. So it's like this is important because I wrote it up. This is me taking that time to create this thing to let you know that there's a problem. And so if that's, you know, pushed off or forgotten about, or somebody then says, oh, we see this ugly thing, like why was that not fixed? It's like, but I did my job. I said here it is. I don't know, there's some psychological something going on there.
Yeah, and then it's interesting to take the other side of that coin. Like, I feel like as my team has become more aware of quality and how they do their own testing, I would argue that I've done as much testing but found less things. So I would be interested to see what if devs, as they're developing, any little thing that they find that they have to go back and fix the code for, if they wrote that up and compared it to like my plan, does that mean that I found it? Sort of, or I had an influence on that, right?
Sure.
Like, yeah, that would be really interesting. It's like I don't feel like I'm finding as many things, which is good. But then at the same time, it's like I remember definite times when I would like point something out to like Gordo or something. He'd be like, "Dude, that's a great bug you found." Like, and then you don't get that satisfaction as much anymore.
Yeah.
But so that's why, like, now I think I took the initiative of, within my squad, trying to celebrate when the team finds an interesting bug, or definitely when Selenium finds something, because there are too many times we get yelled at when it finds something that doesn't make sense or it just fails, right? That we should celebrate when it does find things, because usually it's big things that we wouldn't have found.
Yeah. The idea of like building up a quality culture and building up people's want to be curious, or to take that extra step and like dig in just a little deeper into something that may seem like a minor issue but ends up being a larger issue. Like, all of that then leaves less there's places that bug count is important, and if you're shifting that role of somebody in a QA role to be more strategy based versus like being the one to execute things, like there is a sense of like, if you grew up professionally in that environment of being the one to execute and to like have control over those things and be the one to create defects and bugs, like shifting away from that, there's an element of like loss that, I mean, there have been times where I've found myself thinking about like, it's been a bit since I've written up a bug, like that's weird.
I do agree with that, and that's why I don't agree with like getting completely away from it. And that's why I usually set up like a testing checkpoint at multiple points during development and just kind of poke around and see what's going on. It's definitely interesting to do it from more of an exploratory sense, like still getting used to it, honestly. Versus writing up something for every single story and saying, okay, it's got to go through me.
Right.
There's a definite talent to testing, as any skill for that matter. I don't necessarily believe that testers are born testers or developers are born developers. There are definitely factors that can contribute to it, but I think that a developer can test and a tester can develop. What a friend I have would describe as like T-shaped skills, where the deep quality parts, but everybody should have a hand in on testing, and quality can have a hand in on development, much like you did, like doing, fixing bugs or implementing a small feature or something. Again, that goes back to the whole technical discussion of gaining a better sense of what's being used, what are React's limitations, and stuff like that. Because then, even if you're not in the code after that, you could be like, oh, this is similar to that time we did it this way, and now it's not working right.
Being able to call back to those experiences has been very crucial to a lot of stuff that I've done. Like, the more that I've been able to dive into the code, I feel like I definitely have a much better sense of like what's going on, and it also provides me with a level of or it provides me with a better ability to assess the scope of the testing that's needed, more so than just knowing what the feature is.
Right.
Because like that's only going to give me one level of like one tier of vision into this thing, and then being able to see like the PRs gives me that second level deeper into like, okay, well, I know that, you know, we're using these already pre-existing things, so like we already have things that have tested those things, so we probably don't need to worry about them, or at least the level of risk is a lot lower with those, so I can focus in on the part that hasn't been touched.
Yep.
And like I very much find myself doing that on a daily basis or hourly or tens of minutes basis.
Analytics has allowed me to kind of take that kind of mindset like and run with it. Because for me, a report is a report is a report. All of those widgets are used in all of them, right?
Yeah.
That has also informed how I automate against it. Smoke tests don't hit every single plot chart. They do it once. The feature tests will hit the rest of them, right? So then, you know, and since a lot of the UI is that, when I make a new report, it's basically the same thing as the last one. Then it becomes the nuances between the networks, right? Like Facebook had a lot of what we call pass-through metrics. We just get them, ingest them, and put them in our databases, and that's kind of how it is. Twitter is more math-oriented. We have to infer a lot from their data and process it and present it in our report. So that becomes the nuance, and then it's more API related at that point, unless I know that so something else we've tried to been shifting a lot of the calculations to the API instead of doing it in the browser. So it becomes thinking about that, and you know, over the past 6 months, it's been trying to just talk with the backend folks and understand how it's going, building out those API tests. And they love that stuff. So, yeah. It's worked pretty well so far. Again, every squad's different, right? I don't know if this approach would work on publishing, where almost every project is something different.
Yeah.
Unless you're adding something to compose, and that's most of that is the same testing across the board, but like workflows, that was completely different. Asset library, that was completely different. Smart inbox was somewhat similar, but you're saving it, right? There's data persistence, and that was kind of like us and custom reports.
All right.
Which is another thing that I have to keep in track every time, because every time we add a new report, well, those widgets got to go into the custom report, and then they added paid ones and stuff, you know. So it's interesting. I mean, it depends on your team and what you're building, but
yeah, it's the idea of
equivalence partitioning.
Testing smart versus testing broad.
There's also a little bit of equivalence partitioning in there too, which is a heuristic. Because like the functionality, like the example that I used to use was that we don't necessarily need to publish, because we've already tested that we've published to every network, right? We don't necessarily have to do that in every flow.
Yeah. We
can pick one and kind of go through it. But yeah, like picking and choosing custom reports had a lot of that. There's no way I could make every report combination of which it's possible, right? So it's kind of like, usually what I end up doing is I build one that is the exact same widget setup as the curator report, look at them parallel, make sure the data matches, and then kind of go from there, like, okay, well, what if I take all of the summary widgets from each different network report and put them together and stuff like that. But there's no way I'm like, all right, now I have a matrix C of, you know, I don't know, 20 something widgets at this point by 20 something. You do the math. That's astronomically large.
Yeah, it's not a simple task, so you have to be smart about it.
Right, and that's where all the heuristics like equivalent partitioning and stuff like that come into play. I thought it was funny that Cody found a joke on Twitter or something like that, like QA walks into a bar and orders 0 beers, and as she said it,
-1 beers,
right,
99 beers, yeah.
As she said it, I was like, yeah, I've heard that already. And then it was like somebody comes in and orders duck and it blows up or something like that. That's a good one.
I think my dad has also sent me something similar to that. But as we're getting close to the end of this session, I mean, I have 2 questions, but I don't think we have time for both of them.
Try and be quick, lightning round.
Well, okay. The first one would be like you were talking about, like the heuristics. How often are you actually actively thinking about the heuristic you're using versus just doing it without realizing?
I would say more often than not, it's the latter, just by instinct.
Yeah.
Like an example, like if you go like compose, right? Like 0 characters, 1 character. I have a perfect example actually. Way back when we implemented, this was a failure on the part of the team, but way back when we implemented the multi-photo publishing, somebody forgot a unit test for, well, what if I don't post any photos? It actually caused it to fail, compose in general to fail if you did not attach a picture. And there you go, that's boundary testing, right? And Paul Burrish, he's not with us anymore, but I remember him being like, oh yeah, I didn't have a unit test for 0. I was like, well, if you and I had talked, right, we would have figured this out. But like nowadays, it's just like, it just kind of comes, like you see a situation or a problem in this case, and you just have these tools or these instincts that kind of inform. It would be really interesting to just have a list of them or something, and then just like tick it off every time you think about it or something, and see which ones you use the most.
Yeah. I
feel like boundary testing is really big for them, but it's like when I'm over here in analytics, the data is what we're given, right? It's really hard for me to be like, all right, I'm going to send a tweet with -1 likes or something like that.
Yeah.
You know, I can't do that.
Yeah, and that kind of goes back to the whole like testing smart is like there's an element of like once it leaves this thing, like you're no longer now testing your project feature, whatever. You're now testing something that
somebody else is
being tested by somebody else.
I mean, you could. I suppose I could throw like a message on the bus with like stupid data and see what happens, right? And it's very similar to what I did with the API tests. Like I have a set of positive ones where I know I should get a 200, or like I would go like, all right, I send a date of -1. What happens, you know? Question 2.
The second question is, since you are leaving Sprout.
I'm leaving?
Eventually.
No.
I'm sorry you had to figure this out. But what, let's see, what, I guess I have at least 2 questions for that as well. What has been your best memory at Sprout? And what do you hope to leave behind as you move on to bigger memory. Or greener pastures, or both?
Darren's gonna make me cry.
Oh no. It'll be a first.
I have too many good memories. Like in summary, it would be like the canoe trips, especially the one when Bedford was there for obvious reasons, if you know that story. Yeah, you were, because we were hanging out that day.
I was there.
Sprout kids, seeing my kids just drool over Molly and like hang out with her like all the time. Like when I told Nora that I was leaving, she got sad specifically because of Molly. So she's like, say hi to Molly for me, and I said it. She's like, say hi to Nora. Yeah, those were like, and just Smash Brothers tournaments, getting to grow up This was my second QA gig after TrustWave, going from like 2 years experience now to almost like 8 or 9. So I've grown up a lot here. I would consider myself a professional engineer now. Like I can hold my own coding. Like when I was in college, I didn't think that was going to happen. That's why I switched to economics and computer science. I feel like I've learned way more here than I ever did in college, which a lot of computer science people say. What do I wish I could leave?
Well, either what you want, or what you hope to leave behind, or what you think you're leaving behind. I mean, in a positive way.
Yeah.
Not like you're missing out on something.
No.
But like the changes that you hope exist beyond you. Outside of
because cloning technology doesn't exist for humans, and I can't leave myself. I don't know, just the impact that I've had on the QA team. I don't. It really sucks that it feels like I'm leaving, and now leadership kind of sees that something is not quite right, and obviously I'm saying this on a recording, but I hope that makes the team better. It's funny because my thing since I've been here is to make QA better and the product better, and my hope is that by leaving, I do allow it to become better. But as far as automation, I feel like I've done a crap ton on it, and hopefully the patterns that we've come up, even if Selenium Java as a repo doesn't exist in a year because we've switched to JavaScript, but the things that we've learned from it are imparted in ideas that I've had and whatnot, or mentorship of Amy, or anybody. I would hope that people have seen me in a positive light as a coach for programming, or even just testing in general. I have a very fun example of that was that I'm a very staunch believer that you don't need requirements to test. And it was really funny. This is before you were here, Bill Maka was on engagement, and he wouldn't write any Cucumber. He had a hard time doing planning because he wanted requirements. I'm like, you just saw the mock-ups, like you have a general idea of what it's going to do. And then Jordan asks me, he's like, hey, I'm writing up a test plan for this feature in Bamboo in the admin stuff. And I'm like, oh, cool. Well, hey, can you help me? Can you write a plan? And then we'll compare notes. I was like, oh, this is a perfect opportunity because I have no clue what the admin tool looks up. And I wrote it up and I gave it to him. He's like, dude, this is almost 1-for-1 exactly what I wrote. And then I go to bed. I was like, see, Bill? He was pretty new, and I guess there is some seniority built into that, or maybe some fear, and having some exposure obviously helps when you have Sprout, but it's like, I think there's a great asset to a successful QA, and something that I have and that I hope that I've given to people is just the ABC, right? Always be curious. I tell my kids all the time, always be curious. What does that button do? And just go from there.
Cool. No?
I was telling Pete, or maybe it was Amy, about how, because I got into software testing. I didn't know it existed, right? Most of us didn't. But I got into it through games. You got in more directly because you actually did testing. I did beta testing, right? And I distinctly remember right before Nora was born, Knights of the Old Republic came out. Or not Knights, the Old Republic, the MMO. And I remember a point when there was a blaster bolt that just froze midair. And I'm just staring at it. I'm like, that's not right. And then it's funny that it appears in The Force Awakens when Kylo Ren stops it. But I was like, I would be like, oh, that's really cool. Okay, write a bug up. 12-year-old kid would be like, oh, that's cool. All right, move on. and then they go, I got in the beta.
Oh yeah, that's.
I took it seriously.
That's a lot of how I handled betas, was just to be able to get into a game that's not out yet.
That was part of it.
Oh yeah.
But I always, again, I always want to help. You know, that's kind of what. That's my. I think that's what I contribute.
Yeah. No. Thanks for being on another